Mics are unmuted and we'll do a quick sound check. Good afternoon, Mr. Ian Scott. Can you hear us?
You might not even care.
Yes.
Clear.
Can you hear me?
No, but no sound.
Unless you want to promote that.
Good afternoon, Ian Scott. Can you hear us?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, can you do a sound check for us?
Trying again.
Yep, can hear you. Perfect. Thank you. And we'll do a sound check for Michel Labrie.
Bonjour. Hello. 1, 2, 3. Hello, everybody.
Excellent. We can hear you as well. Anyone else joining from your team, Ian or Michel?
Yes, there's two more
Lee King is there as well.
Okay, great. Lee King, we'll do a sound check for you. Can you hear us?
Hello, good afternoon. I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. All right.
We just have Zoe from local practice who just joined the call as well.
Okay, I'll do one more for Zoe. Zoe, can you hear us?
I can, thank you.
Excellent. We can hear you as well.
Okay, call the committee of the whole meeting to order on July 29th of 2025 at 4:30. Acknowledgement that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. Notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. Notice to virtual attendees to sign up for public comment and question period using the Q&A function in Zoom. To register, participants are required to enter their full name, residential address, and the agenda item they wish to speak to. I move by unanimous consent that pursuant to Section 15 of the District of Tofino Meeting Procedure Bylaw number 1229/2016 as amended, the July 29, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel, and that the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at the Tla-o-qui-aht Sound Theatre, 380 Campbell Street, in Tofino, BC. Seeing no objections, that motion is passed. I move by unanimous consent that the July 29, 2025 Committee of the Whole agenda be adopted. Seeing no objections, the agenda is adopted. I move by unanimous consent that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held June 2nd, 2025 be adopted. Seeing no objections, those minutes are adopted. Let's recall any public comment on agenda items.
Thank you, Chair McMaster. I will now do an open call for comments. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. And if there's anyone attending online via Zoom that would like to make a comment, you can do so now using the Q&A function. Before making a comment, you'll need to say your name, your address, and the agenda item you're speaking to. I will now do an open call, calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times. No comments at this time.
Thank you. We have no delegations and no correspondence, so we'll move straight to presentations and reports. It's brought by the Tofino Housing Corporation. These are invited presentations and they've asked for up to 25 minutes. So unless there are any objections, I'm going to grant permission for that. Any objections? Seeing none, we'll pass it over to the presenters for the Housing Corporation, Ian Scott and Lee King, and for the architectural consultants, we have Mallory Stuckle in person and Michel Labrie remotely. So I think Ian, start.
Yeah, I'm going to start. I just want thank you, Councillor McMaster. I just wanted to do a time check. We understood these were kind of 2 separate items and it intended to tackle the first item, the site feasibility first, and then the library and housing on Main Street components second. But those combined might take more than 25 minutes for our presentation. I just want to check to see if that's acceptable.
I was intimating 25 minutes for each one. So.
Oh, okay, great. We'll try to keep the first one shorter than that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm joining you from my home office in Victoria, BC, on the traditional lands of the Esquimalt and Songhees are the Lekwungen speaking peoples. And I've always appreciated every visit and the work I've gotten to do over the last number of years in the territories of the Tla-o-qui-aht in your very beautiful part of the world. I'm going to present just a little intro before local practice architecture does a presentation on the site feasibility work. This work, or the idea for this work, started when I was first working for the Tofino Housing Corporation a number of years ago. And Kelly Lynn, along with district staff, kind of took up the mantle and were able to raise some money through the application to the Housing Accelerator Fund to launch a piece of work that local practice architecture was hired for. And so just I'm going to share my screen now. So really, this first piece of work is looking to answer the question of, what are the best district lands for THC facilitated below market housing? And that, without zooming through my presentation, excuse me, try that again. Keep my hands off my computer so it doesn't start scrolling on me. What are the best district lands for THC facilitated below market housing? As you know from the work at Creekside and Headwaters, one of the key ingredients to the past success has been district land being provided, which helps reduce the cost, but also more significantly leverages other funding. So funding from the Rural Dividend Fund, funding from the BC Housing Community Housing Fund, funding from the CMHC Co-Investment Fund, which is now called the CMHC Affordable Housing Fund. Given community interests, as well as what has happened to date with THC development, a big question that many wanted asked was, what other options exist besides DL 114? Where might future housing development to meet the housing needs occur that wasn't on DL 114? And as I said earlier, this work is mostly funded by the Housing Accelerator Fund. The work that local practice architecture was hired to do started with a district staff process working with McElhaney consultants, as well as some internal consultations about what are the district lands that should be part of this analysis. 5 sites were identified through that work, and the library site, based on the consultation as well as work that was a negotiation ongoing with the library. The library site was put up as one of these potential sites, but it was accelerated to a different level of analysis, which you'll see next, given the interest in the regional library to fund and to be housed in a new location in Tofino, as well as council saying, please consider these lands for that potential purpose. The work that local practice architecture has done, what is being presented and summarized for you this afternoon, is looking at pursuing development with council permission eventually on 740 Campbell Street, it being the next best site as per the analysis. The next, second, and third best sites were the Headwaters infill option and development of 370 Campbell. So that's the site next to Municipal Hall. That one, as will be explained, also has some considerations around a kind of a campus approach to that area, along with possible redevelopment or the future of Municipal Hall. In terms of our next steps, we do have a little bit of budget left and would like to continue and have local practice architecture develop concept plans for 740 Campbell. With those plans, we being THC, would look to council for endorsement to proceed with the rezoning, along with a commitment, if THC resources continue to go into it, to provide the land to THC if we can find a feasible affordable housing project, along with support from other levels of government. And ultimately, it's going to be a THC decision, given the other projects on the go and the resources that THC has available, whether to do that, to keep going with the design of 740 Campbell, or maybe pause a little bit while the rezoning process is underway and wait for new funding programs and opportunities to emerge. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to one of my colleagues at Local Practice Architecture.
Great. Thank you, Ian. So I will share my screen here. So myself and Michelle Labrie are coming to you from Vancouver. So thank you for having us remotely. So we're in East Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. But love working in Tofino, have visited a few times, and have been doing this work in partnership with Mallory Stuckel, who is a local architect there in Tofino. Despite our name being local, we are in Vancouver. So as Ian said, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the work that we did on this study, and just note that the final product of this work, there's much more information to be found in the site feasibility report that was issued earlier this month. So ultimately, this site evaluation, we were asked to evaluate 5 sites, and the outcome was a ranking of the top 3 and a scoring of all of the sites. As Ian mentioned, 740 Campbell was the top ranked site and the highest score. So I will get into kind of how we came to that conclusion. So project overview here, this is just a map of the 5 sites, confusingly kind of called site 1 through 4, with there being a site 3A and a 3B. And as you can see, it's quite diverse in terms of size and also location across these sites. So we have a couple in downtown Tofino, the larger DL 114 in the forest, and then 2 out off the highway on the assessment process really had kind of two sub-processes with it. First was to test each site for housing capacity for multifamily housing development. So this included taking in consideration site boundaries, topographic, physical constraints, including existing infrastructure and access, zoning precedents, and bylaw requirements. So taking a look at the current zoning, but also precedents for potential rezoning for each of these sites. Precedents being like near things that exist already in Tofino. Understanding the building code constraints involved, and then using BC housing standards as the basis of design, at least for the unit areas. The second process was to evaluate and score, and so this was somewhat challenging given the diversity of the sites to compare. A little bit of apples to oranges in a sense, but we did this by kind of coming up with these different categories of comparison and then applying a score based on a scale. So policy and planning, site access and services, site characteristics, community and livability, cost and risk management, and then future potential and sustainability were our broader categories. To get into the site capacity testing a little bit, this was a iterative diagramming process that we were able to test a bunch of different kind of design options. And just to be clear, we're not proposing any architecture in these. They're intended to be kind of zoning and planning diagrams. So the colored blocks are purely diagrammatic. So this is an example of a couple of the diagrams we produced for the 370 Campbell site downtown, but just to give an idea. And then, so we ran through different options in terms of density, housing type, whether commercial is included, parking, whether subgrade or surface, and then also relationship to the context in terms of site access and kind of how each option might interact with the streetscapes. The second assessment process was the evaluation and scoring process. And So within each of the categories I previously outlined, we had various criteria and then applied a scale rating of 1 to 5, with 1 being poor, 5 being excellent, and then 3 being average, as kind of an equal scoring there. And this gave us a structured way to evaluate the relative strengths and weaknesses of each site, but it's important to note here that the scores are based on just the current available information and our professional judgment, and qualitative aspects are often lost in the numbering of these. So the numerical scoring alone shouldn't be held as the end assessment of the sites, that is to say. So at the end of this process, going through the site, all 5 sites with this iterative diagramming and scoring, the final ranking is here on the screen: 740 Campbell Street, DL 114, and then 370 Campbell Street. And so in summary, we determined that 740 Campbell Street is a great candidate for a multifamily residential project and can accommodate parking, some level of density, is convenient to downtown Tofino, but also fits in well with kind of access to outdoors and that lifestyle. And then also the site has the potential to provide beach access for the broader community. So in the end, I think just reiterating the recommendation that Ian outlined here is for the consultant team, which is us and others, to develop a drawing package to get more information about costs associated with this project. Thank you.
And just to close, I think we obviously did a rigorous scoring with numbers, as Zoe explained, but I think our basically the numbers confirm our kind of professional opinion of these 3 sites as being the top 3. I think we could be debated if it's 99 or 100 points or 101 point, but I think at the end we feel pretty confident about the overall assessment of the sites. Thank you.
Questions before we move on? No questions? Okay, we can carry on.
All right, switching gears to the one site that was pulled and switched to a different process. And this is the Main Street, what we're calling Main Street Library and Housing. I trip over the name of it every time I say it, because it's really a mixed use project where we're looking at library and housing, plus some other spaces on the ground floor consistent with the downtown vitality and creating a streetscape. So I'm just sharing my screen briefly again. I just want to set the kind of context again for what we're doing today versus what is going to happen in the future. So when we look at the library and housing site, our work that is a combination of work being conducted by City Spaces Consulting, the company that I work for now. Myself and colleagues are collaborating on it, along with we've hired local practice architecture and a number of other consultants, mechanical, electrical. There was a survey done. We have structural engineer, civil, looking at the various components that make a building come together and that influence ultimately the costs. And that is a key aspect of determining, the feasibility of the project and what are the elements that are going to be required to make it feasible. The presentation today is really mostly about design and to allow for some questions and early feedback from council, as well as to get onto the public record, that this endeavor is being considered, and will require a process that would include a rezoning. The work is being undertaken currently is funded by the Tofino Housing Corporation and the Vancouver Island Regional Library, who are both putting up some of these early pre-development funds, given the both parties' consideration of the opportunity. We're going to come back in September with an updated design and financial analysis. So now combining, this is what the building looks like, this is what the numbers look like, what are some pathways to making this happen? And the sort of the pulling this and focusing on this was really twofold. One, it was through the district and Vancouver Island Regional Library having conversations, and the library allocating capital funds for doing tenant improvements in a location if one was provided to them. And then another component was the CAO, Tla-o-qui-aht, having a conversation with Lisa Helps at BC Builds, saying, what do you think? And Lisa said, we'd like to take a look at it. And then the third kind of component, why we're trying to move this as fast as possible, is to action some funds available through the Housing Accelerator Fund for a contribution for 21 units. That said, the project is designed with 32 units, if I've remembered my number correctly. Zoe or Michelle, jump in if not. The early financial analysis is one early in our process. After we got started with local practice and city spaces, BC Builds announced that their contribution space is full currently, and that if you want BC Builds support, you're going to get in line. And Lisa Helps was unable to really indicate how long that lineup looks. So that's is something that we will revisit. But the early kind of concept for this was getting a BC Builds contribution, which comes in plus or minus 200,000. And what that means is you get a grant of 6.4 million, which helps make a project like this work. 20% of the units end up being 20% below market based on an appraisal, and 80% of the rental units are set at market. So we're at the place as part of this work asking ourselves what other funding and financing models might exist, and or how long might we have to wait for BC Builds to come back to the table. That's something that we'll look at. There are other opportunities out there, and we'll talk a little bit more about those next time. The early work we've done is definitely demonstrating that the feasibility is going to be driven a lot by the ground floor leases and the rental rates for those units above, and we have an appraisal in progress to help us clarify what's kind of the right and fair price. The other question we've also asked ourselves is, do some of the units need to be sold? So, for example, maybe some of the upper floor view units to help raise some money, to make the project feasible. The other thing we've talked about is that this site is currently used as a public parking area, and what happens when you transform it into a building. And so one of the questions was, could we have one level of parking dedicated to the uses, that are coming in the new building versus another level for, public underground parking. And based on what the site currently earns in parking revenue, it would need to earn 5 to 10 times the current amount from a smaller area, because once we're going underground, we have ramps and other things that take out some of the available parking. So really what that means is higher rates and more usage, which in the Tofino context, first building with underground high price parking that needs to be used a lot more than it is currently. That's an extremely risky business venture. And then so the conclusion there is, we think there needs to be an entity willing, to provide grant dollars if that second level of underground parking was to be made available for parking, so that whatever debt, if any, was associated with that second level, could be afforded. The other kind of question just to throw out there is, currently we're at 24 stalls with 32 units. Based on experience in Tofino, that is still slightly maybe below an optimum. But you push that even further given the downtown location and, for example, allocate, say, half the stalls to the, the residential component and the rest become public and visitor hourly parking that could be used by residential visitors, by the public, or people coming to the library or the commercial units on the ground floor. And ultimately the question that we'll present more of is what is feasible and how, and how affordable can we get this project using a combination of THC funds, the land that's coming in for free, the Housing Accelerator Fund contribution, and then other potential district contributions, some already embedded in your bylaws, some that might become part of the, the discussion as to whether it's appropriate or not. So that's the context. And so I'd like now to pass it over to local practice to walk you through where the design has gotten to and to take any feedback or questions for all of us after that. And I think maybe I'm passing it over to Mallory in-house there to take on the presentation, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
We'll just wait till the slideshow comes up, but my name is Mallory Stuckel. My firm is Mallory Stuckel Architecture and Design, and I'm working in collaboration with Local Practice Architecture. I used to work with their firm when I lived in Vancouver. So that's how we're related and why we're working on this project together. It's helpful that I live here and I have some context from that. So just to open, we'll start with a land acknowledgement, I believe. We flip forward, yeah. This work takes place on the traditional territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, part of the New Chinese peoples. This land has been cared for since time immemorial through the stewardship laws and teaching of the Tla-o-qui-aht, whose relationship to these land and waters continues today. With deep respect, it's recognized this is not just a beautiful place, it is Indigenous territory, and being here carries a responsibility to learn from, support, and stand alongside Tla-o-qui-aht leadership in efforts towards environmental protection, cultural revitalization, and justice. Story of place. So we're just opening a little bit with the story of place, where we are located in Tofino. It refers to the unique physical, cultural, and ecological characteristics that shape how a place is experienced, understood, and inhabited. In Tofino, this story is deeply tied to the coastal rainforest and the rhythms of the Pacific Ocean, and as just mentioned, the traditional terra of the Tla-o-qui-aht. Architecture here reflects a sensitivity to climate, land, and community, built by restraint and shaped by weather and grounded in the realities of remote, resourceful living. So the agenda today, I'll do a quick overview of the project. We'll look at the landscape plans, review the floor plans, some massing, take a look at the building height, and then some visualizations, talk about some color and materiality, and look at a few form studies for the library. So just to open, Tofino, this is where we're located. Tofino's architecture responds to this edge between forest and ocean, and structures here are often low profile, weather adapted into the landscape, and they often blur the boundary between indoor and outdoor so we can celebrate the beautiful area that we live. Culture and territory, again, touching on this. This is Tla-o-qui-aht territory where Indigenous knowledge continues to guide land and stewardship. And the architecture here needs to reflect these values through careful siting, ecological sensitivity, and cultural respect. In the town core is shaped by modest 2- or 3-story wood frame buildings at the moment. You can see the pharmacy here with housing above and commercial below. And there's still a number of single family homes downtown, specifically along Main Street, where we're talking about today. And then the lifestyle in Tofino. When we're talking about housing downtown, I think we need to honor the fact that a lot of people surf here, a lot of people have storage needs, and there's just a general reality to living here. In the top image, you can see how someone's hung their kayak to kind of be resourceful in one of the multifamily developments here. So people need a space to store surfboards, sea kayaks, bikes, gear, and other things suited to coastal living. And then local materials, these are all photos from Tofino. So we have the wood benches downtown, some cedar in the center, which is taken from the MAC. And overall, this is sort of the palette that we have downtown, which is mostly wood and some metal buildings. And then the climate, just talking about the climate here, we have a pretty unique climate when it comes to Tofino. We're wetter than a lot of places in Canada. We need to work with the climate in a way that we're supporting ventilation, and we're also ensuring that we design robust buildings that can handle the rainfall that we get here every year. So project overview, this project right now, the visualizations will show are 4 stories above grade. This is the lane here, 3rd Street and then Main Street, and then the totem, which is at the 3rd Street Park and Lookout. So at the moment we have commercial along 3rd Street. This is the building we're in right now with the theater here. And so commercial just behind here, and then a residential bar that's located just between Main Street and the lane. As Ian mentioned, right now we're going to show 1 level parkade. 1 or 2 is sort of up for debate. The ground floor library, 2 CRUs, a shared meeting room that could be rented out by the community on the main floor, and residential levels 2 to 4. 32 total units, 13 studios, 12 1-bedrooms and 7 2-bedrooms, and a resident deck at level 4. So here's a photo of the site. This is where you're standing at the totem and you're looking at the corner. It's been asked in the visualizations about the palms, but there are a number of palm trees on this corner. And this is a view kind of looking at it. You can see some of the residential in behind, and then you can see the theater that we're in now just on the far left side. A couple more views from the site. This is the totem we're referring to across the street. There is a large piece of infrastructure right now, which is close to sort of the residential development at the bottom corner here. And there's quite a large grade change along the site. So this is along 3rd Street, and this is the alley. But coming down along here, you can start to see the grade. So the topography starts to drop off along Main Street. So looking at the landscape plan, this is an early version of it. The idea is to reference some of the boardwalks that are around town for some of the local shops. So there's 2 small boardwalks that would cross, like a small bioswale that runs along the edge here. The residential entry, there's one at the alleyway, but the main residential entry is off of Main Street, and you can see that infrastructure at the top there. And then there's a large plaza at this corner, and the intention is to create a relationship with the park across the way, which is one of the programmatic elements that we wanted to incorporate. And then there's a large public bench right at the corner, bike parking, and the bench is covered in rain protected. And the parkade level, so parkade entrance is along the alley just at the base here. 24 parking stalls. This is the maximum stalls for 1 level of parking. We've got surf storage right here, bike storage here, and then there's a mechanical room in the upper corner. The ground floor level, so just to orient you to the building, the library, as mentioned, is at this corner here. And then there's an outdoor courtyard, and the intention is to activate this corner and make that a really public, welcoming corner. The CRUs are down here. The residential entry, the main one, is up at 3rd or Main Street, sorry, I didn't mean to say 3rd. And then there's another residential entry just accessed off the alley. This is that shared amenity room. So there's a walkway so you could move all the way across the site from the alley all the way to Main Street. And that could be rented out by residents. It could be used by the residents or potentially even used by the library. Other than that, there's a loading bay along the alleyway, garbage room in the alleyway as well, and then a PMT just at the front near the other infrastructure. In terms of the floor plans, as I mentioned, we've got 13 studios, 12 1-bedrooms and 7 2-bedrooms, which is 32 units in total. And then we have a rooftop amenity space just off this bar here. So it's a long residential bar of housing with a couple of units just over top of this area here. The rooftop amenity space can be used for things like community gardening, could be a safe children play area, and it also provides sun and shade. There's shared laundry on each floor and balconies. There's 24 units that have full balconies and 8 studios with Juliet balconies. So just to open, this is sort of the start of what the massing could look like. So you can see the residential entry at this lower side here. That's where the infrastructure is. And then this is that public plaza. In this rendition, when we're looking at the massing, we're looking at some pitched roof forms. And that sort of mimics some of the pitched roofs that you see around Tofino. On this side, this is where the CRU entry is. And there is currently a bus stop there, which we are kind of working on figuring out whether that wants to stay. Here's another version of the massing with more of a pitched roof slope. So, I mean, it is a relatively large building, but overall, most of the massing is on the side, like kind of spread out between Main Street and the alley. And then the library creates a nice cultural connection at the corner with the totem. The roof is intended to be a rain feature. So you can see it's kind of hard to see, but there's a rain chain that would drop down to some sort of rain feature off of the roof. So this is some streetscapes showing what the scale looks like in place. And important to note here is the RCMP building at the back, which is right here. This building is lower than the RCMP building. So if you're out on the water, it would be relatively the same height, although quite a bit higher than the surf shop next door. So you start to see it in context and understand how the building fits into Tofino at large. This is another version, and you'll see that the color is changing and some of the roof forms are changing, and this is all under development, but we're just showing a number of different options at this stage. So here's the public plaza, library, and the intention with the library is that there could be artwork displayed in the windows and it can become a really great public feature. Covered seating area, and then the CRUs are over there. The balconies at the second floor would be more opaque than the upper level to kind of deal with the public-private transition. And the way that we've done that is just by turning the board for the balcony. And so there's more privacy from that second floor. And here also, I want to point out that there's stepped planters along the street because there is that big slope change running from the library down the opposite corner. Another view, and this time we're looking from 3rd Street and we're looking towards the alley. So there's a second residential entry at the back here. That's the parkade entrance. This is now we're looking at the CRUs at the main level. Again, a bit more of an opaque balcony at the second floor and then opening things up as you come up. Actually, if we can go back to the one just before this and just pointing out that residential amenity roof space at the top there. And then again, this is sort of that swale bridge access that would be along 3rd Street. And we're proposing the theater has an adjacency. There's a window behind here so that those units on that side would have triple pane glazing and potentially a large mural of some kind, bringing some public art to the building. Here's another version of the corner at 3rd and Main, again, bringing in more of a colored building. Tofino has lots of colorful buildings, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But again, this time we're looking at a shed roof. You can see the amenity space up top and the central library in the plaza and then the residential entry. So showing a number of different options. Again, this is a view of the alley, and the intention is for this alley to become quite activated so that the alley isn't necessarily back of house or like a back alley with a garbage space. It's meant to be quite a beautiful entry still for the residents, and it creates safety by having the CRUs at that level and kind of having eyes on the street at all times. The balconies are intended to be weather protected and covered. So the context in Tofino, a lot of buildings are in wood here for good reason. It rains a lot, wood holds up really well over time. So these are just a number of buildings. The top row specifically are buildings that you're likely to see from the waterfront. This is the new Biosphere Center by Motive, the MAC, Duffin Cove, and then the Shore building at the waterfront. So looking at materiality, we'd be looking at wood and potentially bringing in a little bit of stone. And really starting to draw in some materials from the downtown core so that we can make the overall design look cohesive with what currently exists here. We also have metal buildings in Tofino. So we've got Fred Tibbs building up here, TRM, and then the MAC. And then also along the bottom, there are a number of metal buildings as well. So there's different ways that we can play around with cladding, whether it's metal, whether it's wood, and starting to explore some of those options. Again, these are photos of metal cladding that you'll see around Tofino. Surprisingly, in Tofino, we have a lot of blue buildings. I spent the time and went around and looked and photographed quite a few buildings downtown, and there's a number of blue buildings. But there's also other buildings, but overall, there is kind of a culture of colorful wood buildings in Tofino. So that's why some of the visualizations that you saw earlier have some color that we can start to bring into it to make it fit into the downtown area. And what our strategy would be is there's different ways that you can approach color because color is obviously very subjective. But what we're doing here is, so the first one is the natural environment. So pulling a palette out of the natural environment that we're surrounded with that fits in. And then the second one is a strategy that starts to pull colors from the built environment. So the palette at the top is coming from a series of images that were taken around downtown Tofino. And so it's meant to be less suggestive of like, oh, I like blue or I like red. It's really, this would involve a greater color study to really look at what's here and then start to draw colors out of that palette. And then finally, these are some of the library form roof studies that we studied. The first one is kind of like a umbrella shape. The second one is more of a radial pattern, and the third one is a wave. And so next steps would be to aim for a Class D costing for the end of August. I believe that is it.
That's great. Any questions for Molly?
Thanks to the chair. I was wondering in the building design, I was looking for elevator shaft. Is that in like the top left area?
Yeah, let's just go back to the floor plans for a moment.
I guess my question was, will the building, all floors be fully accessible?
Yeah, all floors will be fully accessible, and there is an elevator shaft down to the parkade as well. And then the amenity space on the top floor can be accessed from that elevator.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anyone else? It's still.
Are you looking for comments as well? Or? Yeah. Well, thank you. That's wonderful. That's really encouraging. This is wonderful. Very much in favor of the color. There was a couple of questions in terms of the going back the overall design. I'm really encouraged by it, but just a couple of questions on in terms of the feasibility financing. And I don't know if you're the person that would be.
I'm not.
You're not. So maybe we'll hold off on that.
Okay.
And we'll get back
Sure.
to that. So maybe I'll pass on some of the comments.
I have two things. One of them was similar to Councillor Sawyer, just with the accessibility. I was wondering if there's accessible parking for the library.
Yeah, there is accessible. If we go to the site plan along Main Street, there's some stalls that are being proposed, or even a landscape plan. So they'll be parking along this street, so that'll all be accessible to get to the library. And then along Main Street, it's a little bit trickier because there is that slope there, but we are proposing a couple stalls because the library needs book drop-off parking. So the idea is that people want to just park for 15 minutes and then drop their books off, but there's parking along 3rd Street that'd be dedicated for accessibility.
And then my next one was in regards to bike storage, if there was any thought to outdoor bike storage space.
Yeah, there's 2 bike storage spaces outdoors. So there's bike storage for the library, and this is a good plan to look at. So there's one kind of right beside the library entrance. And then over at the residential entry, there's sort of a private kind of residential lobby area that's covered and outdoor, and we're showing a couple bikes there. And then also down at street level, the idea would be to put some in by the P&T, although they're not currently there. And then we've talked about potentially having even more bike storage in this area, just acknowledging that a lot of people have bikes here.
We're also contemplating having ample bike storage in the basement, including e-bikes as well, and charging stations for e-bikes in the basement.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, at one time we had some design principles that we incorporated into review of designs for the downtown core that included covered walkways, to be out of the rain. At one point, we even had some colored suggestions based around some marine principles from early settlers here. And so some of the things that you pointed out and you've gathered from the built environment have been sort of actively encouraged or worked on over the years in and also some of the buildings and the pitched roofs were trying to keep a bit of that historic element of from settler population here. So I'm not saying that we were stuck on sticking to those and we've abandoned a lot of them, I think, in our design review now. But I'm glad to see some of them sort of reflected in the design. I think some of the we could incorporate maybe another color palette might include some First Nation colors that were used in their artwork. And another thing we found that some of the roof lines were changed in some of the buildings in the downtown core to reduce the massing, so that the flatter roofs give it more of a block appearance. So my preference with the larger buildings is to have some pitched roofs. Without posing as a design review panel person, which I don't sound, I don't want to go into too much detail on it, but I like to see some continuity in that as the downtown gets more developed. So yeah, that's it. And I like also some of when you use sort of solid walls of finishes, outside finishes, you can also increase the massing quite a bit by having full facades of building in one finish. So when it's broken up with stone and some steel and some wood or even different uses of wood in different configurations or colors even, it can reduce the massing a bit too. And one of the things that, as we reviewed this project sitting in the Housing Corporation chair seat, I was spooked by the size of it and the impact that it would have on the downtown. So I think that this preliminary designs here have done a great job. Not as spooked, but seeing it worked a little bit on. Yeah, seeing some renderings that I could see it could work better, be more widely accepted. So yeah, that's my comments.
Thank you for your comments. I spoke a little bit to the wood cladding, and in some of the images, the intention is either that could be a painted wood or maybe it can be cedar similar to the MAC that's been grayed or starts to color change over time, which I think has been kind of a nice treatment of the wood downtown, and it's been kind of fun to watch the color of that building change. But overall, I think the idea would to bring the building into context so it really fits into the Tofino landscape instead of dropping a giant alien building right downtown.
Hello. Just gonna follow up on Councillor Anderson. I think that it is fairly large. It's a big building, and I'm happy to see some of the changes. I mean, not everybody gets to see that, but we do on the Tofino version, and it's great. When it comes to the public, I personally would agree with Councillor Anderson. Break up some of that large mass with some color, change, wood and metal, and also, just noting that wood has a lifespan. It's very shorter than metal. That's something to think about as well. It all has to be recladded with wood at the same time because the lifespan is over. That's a significant hit to that building, maybe in 20 years. which comes fast. So that would be my. I did have a question for you though. Are you looking for that kind of feedback from us at this moment? Is now the time to sort of say, hey, we like the shed roof, or we like the peak roof, or we like.
That's a good question. I'm actually going to defer to Ian and Michelle to find out what feedback that they're really hoping for from this review today. Michelle,
I'd say on the design team, we absolutely welcome any feedback on form and material and cladding, and been taking lots of notes here. So thank you already for the great feedback regarding the scale and how to break it. But yeah, absolutely. And I think Ian might have some other comment about that type of feedback that he's looking for to help with the pro forma work as well in parallel to the design work.
No, I would just say ditto. The more comments and feedback and questions, the better it helps inform the process.
Back to Councillor Steer.
So, yeah, thank you. I do have just a couple questions in terms of the design layout, the configuration. There were no 3-bedroom units, and I'm just thinking in terms of the ideas around, we are looking at those spaces where we may be able to include families, and two bedrooms may be necessary for them as well. So I'm wondering, in terms of the concept of moving with those studios in 1 and 2 bedrooms, was there any conversation around the inclusion of any 3-bedroom units with this?
Yeah, we did originally have a few 3-bedroom units, but overall, being the downtown site, it felt like this might be better suited for people that weren't necessarily those larger family units. And then we looked at 740 Campbell, for instance, earlier, which has more access to park space, more access to the beach, and this is right downtown. So it may not be the best location for 3 bedrooms, but that said, there's still room to change the design if all of a sudden 3 bedrooms were desirable. But overall, because it's so downtown, it seemed that the 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom mix would be better suited for this location.
I could have a follow-up. And then I was just curious about the shared amenity room and the concept or the understanding. And I didn't know what the square footage was in that shared amenity room. And I'm always wondering, we can house people, what the idea was behind that amenity.
Yeah, the idea is that it could be a way, oftentimes in housing projects, it's nice to have people from the community interacting with people that are actually living in the building, so it doesn't become its own silo. So you offer a space where people are able to maybe rent the space. I've heard a lot just from living here that people are looking for a meeting room that they could rent out for different events or different things like that. So the idea is to be able to welcome the public, to enjoy the space, to have be a part of this building, but also have that amenity for residents. What we also know is in a lot of multifamily buildings, amenity rooms for the residents just themselves tend to be underutilized. You've probably been to them, you've probably seen them. So this is a way to say, you know, people from the public can also rent it out, and it has a separate access from the alley. So it just means that it's a space that gets well used by the community versus being kind of an empty space that residents might not use.
That was kind of where I was going with that. And I'm just wondering, do you have a rough idea what the square footage of that space is, or?
Good question.
Roughly 540 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
0.67.
Thanks, Ian.
Councillor Sawyer first.
Yeah, it was just a comment, I guess, for feedback, since it was mentioned. I'm least in favor of umbrella style roofs or wave roofs.
Right.
But other than that, I did actually enjoy the design having more 1 and 2 bedrooms, because I acknowledge that being in the downtown core next to the theater, not far away from the MAC beside the police station, I think that minimizing the chance for negative interactions with noise is positive. And so if we are creating spaces for families elsewhere, and then the people moving into this building would be like, okay, we're living downtown, it's going to be noisy. I think that's a really good way to roll with things.
Yeah, I think there's a reality about downtown being noisy. I mean, I've heard that even Opitzik can hear the MAC when there's shows there. So I mean, audio does move.
And even like floodplains, things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Sloan, followed by Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, first I'd like to say I, as well as Councillor Anderson, was initially a little bit spooked by the size of it, but I think you did a really good job of incorporating with the wood siding and the contrast to the police station, I think it looks like it fits really well, especially with this setback of the gardens, the garden roof. I really like the idea of the wood siding because I think that's a softer material. I think that would blend better with our community. And I like the underground parking. I'm kind of interested in having the 2 levels, but I hate to lose parking downtown. I would like to see some 3 bedrooms because I actually would like to argue that I think downtown is a great place for families to live. It's close to the school, close to the ball fields. And I think that's about it.
Councillor Sloman touched on my comments for being in favor of some 3 bedrooms just because it's walking distance to the school and daycare and the grocery store. And I think yeah, having all of that stuff walkable, especially when we're talking about affordability and possibly people not having access to a vehicle. And then on the subject of vehicles, I'm wondering if there's any forward thinking for EV charging in the parking, given that I live in a building where we're unable to upgrade the EV because it wasn't thought about in the initial stages with the electric panels. So if that could be something that's incorporated from the start.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And we talked a little bit about the EV bikes as well. We don't have a ton of e-bikes right now in Tofino, but people still have them. And so making sure that we have EV parking station and e-bikes parking stations are both important.
Yeah, we already have consideration for 6 EV stall parking in the parking already. So.
Well, sure. Just going to follow up. I know the THC, we did talk about 2 bedrooms and perhaps pushing them out to 740 Campbell Street. But just thinking now, if there's some of those units for sale, that there are 2 bedrooms, single bed units around town for sale. We have townhouses, we've got apartments. There really is very few 3 bedrooms for sale, and that may appeal to a kid or maybe a parent they're looking after something to get in. There isn't anything available. That's just for sale. So I just want to echo. Maybe there's other ways of looking at those 3 bedrooms. If there was 2 or something like that, maybe. And the other thing on the flip side, I realized that if there are units for sale, this is supposed to be for residents housed here who live here. If some of those units are 1-bedroom studio, they may get sold on the market to people from out of town and left empty, or as just. So I think that's not the goal here. It's to serve the community. So maybe just thinking about exactly, and even asking people to have 1 or 2-bedroom units, what they really wish they could have to stay here. Maybe ask their opinions. It may come out that 3 bedrooms, a couple 3 bedrooms would be a great option. Just an idea.
I see Ian's got his hand up, so sure. Let me speak before we go around again. Ian.
Yeah, the question of what is the right unit mix is also influenced a little bit by the financial feasibility considerations. And so every time you talk about financial feasibility, you also have to talk about risk. And so we will talk about that a bit more in September. But, for example, putting up a 3-bedroom for sale, what's the market for that kind of unit in Tofino? Are there enough buyers? Will they pay what we need to sell them for to make the pro forma work? It's the same thing with a 3-bedroom. We're not going to have very deeply affordable units in this building unless there's a government program that supports us. And certainly the experience already at Headwaters, is the 3 bedrooms are the ones that don't necessarily go as quickly, even in that location. So, there's a combination between what might be the wish in the community versus what is realistic for the operator. And who's holding that risk. So if your 3-bedroom sits empty for a number of months, it starts to burn a very deep hole in your operations very quickly. And it would be the same thing if you had a 3-bedroom for sale that sits unsold for quite some time. It burns very quickly a hole in your in your budget, and I think we can see some of those experiences have happened in Tofino with various developers. So that's always very mindful. That's something we're just always keeping very much in mind. That while yes, there might be a desire, do those people who need that housing, are they willing to pay what we have to sell it for or rent it for to make the budget work? And the only way to overcome that is additional contributions from government, including from the district if so desired. So there's a balancing act there, and we'll talk about that next time. But that's always a tough reality that we're faced with in these projects.
Councillor Sloan first and Councillor Sawyer.
My question was regarding the e-bike stations, or I've been recently watching on the news, some of them are catching fire. Is there some sort of standard to keep those safe? Because I imagine tenants will have whatever bike they can afford.
Yeah, usually in the parkade, they have to have a 2-hour fire rating around them on all sides for e-bikes or any sort of storage room. So that's something that definitely needs to be considered. I've heard the same thing when it comes to aftermarket battery considerations. So I think that's something that we can achieve with fire ratings in that room.
And consultants also install like smoke detector and extra sprinklers, so it is a known issue technically, and there's easy technical solution if you think about it right from the beginning.
Thanks. This comment through to Ian, Scott, and Lee King. I appreciate hearing that we're taking some of the experiences from Headwaters into consideration even at the design level. I think it's really valuable that we have that real world Tofino experience to see what worked. Townhouses selling didn't work, 3-bedroom units tougher to rent, and I know that it's been enough 2 years now or so that we've seen turnover in some of those units, so we're able to see how long certain types of units are occupied, and we can really look at those stats.
And another project I'm working on adjacent to THC, I did some interviews with the residents of the building just to find out what they liked about their housing, what could be better. And so I'm hoping to incorporate some of that feedback in some of the other multifamily housing projects that are here.
Michelle's got his hand up.
Just to clarify as well, like from a design perspective, it is possible for us to adjust the unit mix. I think it's mostly, as Ian said, driven by the pro forma and the risk, because it could be that this upper floor has a different unit mix. I mean, we've tried to stack up the units so that it's efficient and cost effective, but on the upper floor we have the flexibility. So I think most of the decisions should be made on pro forma, risk, and what is related to the kind of commercial consideration about the unit. But design-wise, there's quite a bit of flexibility.
Yeah, just it goes maybe to Ian and the crew around the feasibility. One in the presentation, there was a comment around the key to the feasibility of those spaces, those commercial spaces. And I'm wondering, in terms of commercial in the downtown core, has that been looked into now in terms of space? There's potential other developments that we're going to be potentially have commercial spaces associated with them. And I'm wondering if that's been taken into consideration at this time.
Yeah, we're using our crystal ball and figuring out which ones are for sure going to happen or not. That is one of the, I'm saying that in jest because it's one of the most difficult things for risk management around projects like this, which is which of the projects that are being conceived, do get to market at a similar point of time, and how do factors way beyond our control, affect affect us. Of course, we've all lived through a very difficult COVID experience, but what other factors, that we're not anticipating might make it more or less, easy, to lease out space. And so those are definitely mindful, but and something we haven't dug deeply into yet, but it will certainly be part of the, the exploration as we get, further into it, and including, the kind of right sizing those spaces in terms of where the partition goes, how flexible that partition space is. It is, but so yes, it's something we've thought about. Do we have the like a really good answer for that yet. No.
Okay, Lee's got his hand up.
Thank you. Yes, just briefly to that point about feasibility, it may form a business case to do a market analysis for Tofino. That is to say, an analysis of the number of residential commercial units coming on stream in the next 3 to 4 years, or at least the short to midterm, 2 to 3 years, by type and tenure. That is to say, rental or ownership, commercial and residential, ditto the market for the price per parking stall or the rent per parking stall, which may be achievable. This would help inform the feasibility of the project, and it's probably something that a future funder, underwriter would undertake of their own accord anyway. So just to the point of nailing down more specifically, what's the depth of the market for 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, either by for sale or for rent, ditto the commercial space, because as been rightly just pointed out, there will be other product coming out of the ground, if I could put it that way, which would help support the potential benefit of a market analysis. So this project could be set within that. Thank you.
It's just a follow-up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, because we have, as you know, housing needs assessments, and we have a fairly accurate picture of what the demand is from that perspective. But we really haven't, as far as I know, have much in terms of the commercial sector in terms of demand analysis. And as you pointed out, and as we know, there are a number of projects on the go. Whether they come to fruition is another question. So it's just something that's top of mind, because in the presentation, it's a key to feasibility was that conversation. So thank you.
Okay. Councillor Anderson, did you?
No, I'm going to leave it. My question, I guess, elevator.
Yeah, there is an elevator. It's just right inside. When you go in the residential entry, that's off Main Street. Right inside the lobby, there's an elevator right there. That goes all the way down to the parkade and up to the 4th floor.
Councillor Thomas.
It was just a thought on parking, because I know Councillor Sloman expressed interest in having that second level parkade. And I think if that was something we were going to explore, would it be worth opening it up as like a almost like a monthly parking garage? Like, instead of being an hourly kind of turnover sort of spot, there might be businesses that are interested in paying for parking spaces for their staff, for dedicated spots, or people coming to work.
Is that done in Tofino already? Are there is there like a market for that already?
I don't know if there is any that's happening. I just know that when we initiated pay parking, there was a lot of backlash from businesses that were like, where are our staff going to park now? So I know there are people that go and have to move their vehicle. And I think there could be interest for it. It might be something that would be worth exploring. And it might be a better way of guaranteeing an income for the parking spaces rather than the fluctuation that we see with.
Thank you for the comment. That's definitely something we'll explore, whether that and how that crunches out. I'm a little worried that the number that needs to be charged might be a bit of sticker shock, but which is why I was asking if there's a market for it already, you know. But if there's no competition, that's both a benefit and a negative on the business side of things. So,
Hello.
One last comment back to kids. Just to note, like building, housing corporation district housing, and it should take into account demographics. Tofino is on the very low end of children per percentage wise. I'd say it's about 11% of our population of children. Then therefore it makes sense when we do below market housing, or community funded housing, which really this is in some ways, that we should take into account those demographics. Now, if in that case, this building that houses say 100 people, technically should probably house about 11 children. And if it doesn't, with, whatever, the makeup doesn't work that way. And we're pushing it off to, and we've already had this discussion, say 740 Campbell Street is more family friendly, maybe it's stable. Just to remember that children are our residents as well. That's who we're building for, not people with children. We're actually building for those residents. And so when we discuss a future project that may, make up for that demographic gap, we'll say, that when it comes to that discussion, we don't throw in there, oh, well, it's going to cost too much, let's just go for suites with 1 or 2 bedrooms or not, you know what I mean? So just want to keep that in, we build the community that we have. And so there's always a bit of a survivorship bias, which I bring up all the time. But we're active builders of the community, not passive. So that's my final spiel.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the benefits with this project is the library. And that's something we've thought about with that public plaza. If there's going to be children there, how do we make sure that kids are safe in the downtown area? Having the residential amenity that where children can go. But then the other consideration is too, often in Tofino, if there's a 2-bedroom unit, it will maybe mean roommates. So how does a unit plan respond to people that might be living there as 2 people that are in their sort of, 25 to 40 range that are living in the units together? It can mean like not putting back-to-back bedrooms in and things like that, which is some of the feedback I heard from Headwaters. In addition to thinking about children, is the roommate situation that we all know exists here.
Anyone else?
Maybe just one last one. I wrote it down, but I haven't even brought it. And it's something
17.
Number 17. It's a long inside joke. Councillor Sloman, as well as other members of council, have often water and water conservation is. I'm wondering within the design, I didn't hear any, and I don't know if it was even in the conversation about any rainwater collection or any form of rainwater or water conservation measures incorporated into the bill.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we have a rainwater feature at the front that was kind of coming off the roof that I alluded to, and whether we've talked a little bit about whether that could actually be a rainwater collection feature or if it could be something educational that can talk to the community about water use, demonstrating how much water has been collected or something like that, whether we could make that an educational piece about water, or maybe it's actually functioning as. But low flow fixtures, all of those pieces that we all know want to be in the building, but nothing specifically about a big rainwater tank. The full block is underground parking, so it gets a little bit logistically challenging. But there might be some sort of educational piece that we could incorporate with the library, with the large sloped roof that's coming into a rainwater feature that educates people in the community about water conservation and some of those pieces.
I think Mayor Law just put his hand up first. I was looking that way for some. Mayor Law.
Through the chair, it's a quickie. I was gonna say we could build a second layer of parking and let it fill up with water.
It's very cool.
I was just gonna say, if this is gonna continue on for a bit, could we call a point of privilege?
I think we're almost done.
Okay.
That's not enough, but I think we're almost done. Councillor Sloan.
My question is, I think you tried to explain it and I just don't quite understand, is like, if we could have 3-bedroom units in there and we're not meeting the family demand, where could, like, how do we maybe, because I hate to not have family units in a building, because that does eliminate families from an option of living there. But how do tenants then get to be able to rent that if the demand from a family isn't met? I don't know. It's a question for Ian.
Sorry, can you, I'm not sure, Councillor Sloan, if I completely understood the question.
I'm just trying to understand, like, if we could have 3-bedroom units in this building, how, and seeing as maybe the immediate demand isn't being met. In the future, like, but maybe we need to have 3-bedroom units there for the future. But in the meantime, before our families have grown in the community have grown to a higher than 11%, could we rent? How do we rent them to tenants? Is that a possibility? Like, to have multi?
Yeah, it is. It is a possibility for sure. It's another, I think, a good question for how Catalyst are handling that over at Headwaters. I believe over there they're a bit restricted given the BC housing funding, which may be, not restricted depending on how this project gets supported. So it's something to consider. Of course, once you have 3 tenants in there, whether it turns over and is made available for a family when they want to move in or are available to move in, but I think I understand your point, which is maybe is there a strategy around sort of longer term sort of expandability or viability, so not meeting the current demand, but trying to anticipate a future thing by creating a flexible option. So it's a good idea that deserves some consideration. And one of the components, as Michelle said, is that we have thought about where in the building a 3-bedroom might go. So doing a little bit of analysis around, how sensitive is the budget to, switching out, a studio and a 2-bedroom to create a 3-bedroom, for example. Like what does that mean to the overall project? And whether that's a wise strategy. Those are the things, for consideration. Ultimately what hasn't been decided yet on this project exactly is, who is the developer, because last time THC facilitated development, we ended up, THC ended up partnering with Catalyst. They became the developer. And ultimately whoever is the developer is the risk taker, and ultimately has to pay back that mortgage. So that does get influenced by who that party is. At this point it's conceived of as potentially THC as the developer. That is a new mode, and that's a discussion that has to be had amongst the internally at THC, how that's going to be approached. Is there a different development mode? At this point we're looking at it kind of at a bigger picture feasibility kind of case at the moment.
Oh. Okay, that's it. I think that was a great presentation, everybody. And I think there's a lot of interest from people around the table. And let's hope this project moves forward. So thank you very much. We'll let you guys go for supper and we'll take a bathroom break.
Thanks. I did it for.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.